I don't know. White privilege. I just don't see it.
You know what you need?
What are these?
White privilege glasses. Helps you see the world the way we do.
Can you see white privilege? Like using these 3D glasses to watch a movie, you need the right lens to look through. Chicago Theological Seminary has created a web video that helps us to see this racial divide and how we all understand the concept of privilege. The campaign has sparked a lot of discussion as well as anger in some circles. For more, we welcome Jason Fry, a PhD student at Chicago Theological Seminary. We also welcome Shay Watts, a second-year MA student at CTS. He's a regular guest blogger for the Huffington Post. Thank you all both for being here. Jason, what is this? Tell me about this campaign. What's going on right now? Why am I holding these glasses?
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a campaign that at CTS, and we're inviting particularly white people to think about the way that we experience the world. And a lot of the times we experience the world as universal. It's the same for everyone. And that's just not the case. It's not true. And these glasses are a metaphor for to examine the way that different people, particularly based on race, experience the world differently. And it's a way of analyzing that and asking the question why and figuring out what's happening and can we see white privilege? Can we see the way that our whiteness actually affects the way that we engage the world? And this is just a campaign to start the conversation going. It's not seeking to make any answers or claims or anything like that. It's just us wanting to start the conversation.
Shay, what are you hoping this campaign will create in terms of conversation for folks who wear these glasses or are looking at the campaign right now?
Chicago Theological Seminary has always been concerned with justice work. So social justice, love, and mercy, seeing that come to fruition in our communities. So this campaign is about having a conversation, as Jason said. It's opening up, it's acknowledging that there are some racial dynamics going on in our countries. And so we hope that it will create a brave space where people can be invited to talk about, to voice their concerns, to talk about the ways systemically that privilege affects other people.
White privilege has been around forever, right? It's as old as America, but why have this conversation now? Like what about right now means that we need to wear these glasses?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that, we're late to this conversation. We should have been having this conversation a long time ago about white privilege. But I think the reason CTS is broaching this topic is because we're recognizing just the fierce urgency of now, and this is feeding into our concerns as a seminary. We have a conference coming up that's going to be, it's focused around the fierce urgency of now as far as working towards racial justice, equality, and all these different intersections of equality work.
I'm sure folks have heard this campaign, seen the video, and I'm sure the response has been on both sides. Tell us about the response from the campaign so far.
So I'm from the community of Charleston, South Carolina. So in conversations with my friends, there's been a little bit of anger, there's been a little bit of pushback to this idea of white privilege because it seems like they feel like they're being attacked. So when they hear white privilege, they automatically assume that we're saying that they're guilty or that they're racist or that they don't deserve the things in their lives. And so it's been kind of a work trying to open up the conversation and to say we are trying to acknowledge something that's going on. If you look from Ferguson to Flint to Charleston, South Carolina with the shootings at Mother Emanuel, we begin to see that there is something going on that white people are treated differently, that white people have certain privileges. And so I think we have to do our job to open up the conversation as an acknowledgement and not so much as a pointed, accusation.
One of the exciting things about this campaign is that you're using privilege that you have to create a conversation. But I'm sure folks have not wanted to have that conversation either. What's the strongest thing you've heard in response?
It's it's a difficult conversation to have, and I think, like Shay said, a lot of white people are afraid to even talk about this because of the fear of sounding racist. And as one of my professor colleagues, professor mentors have told me that we need to acknowledge that we're, as white people, recovering racists. We'll never overcome it, but we can work towards recovering from it. And a lot of the strongest resistance I've experienced is particularly people who don't experience a lot of privilege in their life as far as economics or class or any of those areas. But it's just to get us to think about the differences that we experience in the world. And it's not going to solve any of the problems, but it's acknowledging that as white people we have to work and participate in this movement for social justice.
Now, one of the difficulties of this is that the other side of privilege is prejudice, right? Mm-hmm. And how can white people, if they don't understand prejudice, how can they really get into this? I mean, what is their entry point if they really just have never experienced prejudice for themselves?
As a gay man, I experience a bit of prejudice regarding my sexuality and the way that people treat me and make stereotypes about who I am as an individual. And it is that at that starting point that I can begin, I can't fully know what it's like to be of another race, but I can begin to experience what it feels like to be othered, what it feels like to be, different, and to have those stereotypes and prejudices used against me. Again, it's not like anything, it's a wholly other subject, but it's just acknowledging that prejudice, that experience, that I can start entering this conversation.
When we can acknowledge that there is privilege, on the other side of that, we can begin to see that others are disadvantaged. So for example, white people get certain treatment in certain situations that are privileged. So we can begin to see through conversation and create some space to look around and say, okay, now I see because of my privilege that other people don't have the same privilege, therefore they are at a disadvantage. And so I found some success in opening up the conversation that way. Kind of helps them look around and see the different ways that white people interact and are treated versus persons of color.
Okay, so I look through the glasses, I understand white privilege. Is that all you want us to do? I mean, is there something more? Are you asking people to give up privilege? What are you asking people who participate in this campaign once they take these glasses off to do?
I think what we're calling people to do is to resist the way that we benefit from privilege without actually analyzing it or critiquing it or working towards justice. And I think that's the call of our message, is to be aware, to recognize, and to then resist, and then start working together to work for social justice. I mean, we can't do it alone, and white people have a responsibility for this movement. We can't rely on others to do it for us. We have to participate.
We have to respond to the way that our privileges have caused pain to other people. And so I think when we start to realize that our privilege has hurt people, we can begin to act against it, begin to resist our privilege, begin to fight for a common, humanity, if you will.
For sure. How does this look in churches? Because, I mean, the Academy, CTS, great conversations. Some of the nation's best and brightest are there having very high-minded conversation, right? But what does this look like for churches that are still very, very segregated, for communities that are very, very segregated? How can they engage in this? What would you like to see them do?
Actually, I preached this last Sunday, on this very topic of privilege, and I used the story of Jesus in the wilderness and the temptation of misusing power and privilege. And it took a lot of work to interweave this message, and it was a lot of careful work because the congregation that I was speaking at is predominantly white, middle class, working class, and I was afraid of how the message would be heard. And if they would be resistant to it at all, they would shut down completely. So CTS has offered resources online towards how to, pastors and religious leaders start incorporating these conversations in their own communities. And what I found is, bringing together not only, white privilege, but also male privilege, class privilege, sexual orientation privilege, along with this conversation, enables people to recognize, yes, there are certain privileges in this world that benefit some and not others. And it just shows that, the world is rigged in ways that, people benefit over other people, and that's just not fair, and that we have a part to critique that system and open it up.
Well, this is a really important conversation. And it's one that, like the 3D glasses, brings the image closer. And hopefully the idea of privilege can be brought closer, not only in the academy, but in our communities and in our churches. I'm Julian DeShazier for Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries. Keep the faith.